and welcome to Behind the Dean's Desk, conversations from the College of Graduate and Professional Studies at the Chicago School. I'm Dr. Alisha DeWalt, Dean of the College of Graduate and Professional Studies. This series is designed to highlight our community voices, ideas, and professional impact that shape our graduate and professional programs. In each episode, we step away from formal titles and curricula to have a real conversation about the work we do, why it matters, and how it connects to practice in the field. So today I'm joined by Dr. Christina Trombley, an associate dean for our college. So Dr. Trombley brings expertise in higher education leadership. And in this conversation, we'll explore leadership and decision-making, the evolving higher education landscape, as well as the journey that led her to this work. So welcome, Christina.
Thank you so much. It's nice to be here.
Thank you. So Christina, to start, can you give us an overview of your role and a sense of the programs that you oversee in the college?
Sure. The role of the associate dean is very much an administrative role, but also a strategic leadership role. So you have to balance those two pieces. It's the same side of, or it's two sides of the same coin. In my portfolio, I have 6 programs. I have public health, educational psychology and technology, business psychology, international psychology, marriage and family therapy, and I always applied psychology. I always have to go through the list of the 6. And so it's a really diverse portfolio, but one of the things that most of them have in common is non-licensure. Most of my programs are non-licensure. The only one that has licensure is a marriage and family therapy. And then both MFT and public health have separate accreditation. So they're a little different. But at the end of the day, all of these programs, like all of the programs at the Chicago School, focus on individual, organizational, and community well-being. And so it's very much the practice of making sure things are healthy, whether that's a person or an organization or community. So the role is really to help build that leadership, to build that strategy, whether it's around enrollment, retention, programmatic reviews. It's helping the chairs prepare their programs for where we believe education is going to be and the industry is going to be several years from now. That gets harder and harder. The other piece, though, is just very tactical, like all administrative. There are things to sign. There are forms that need to be filled out. There are both good and not so great things that have to happen, whether it's with faculty or students. These are the things, what I call just the grease that keeps the machine moving, right? You need to have these processes in place just to make sure. And the biggest thing that I think an administrator does is understand how the practice, the policy, and the process work to move these things forward. If I can't answer those questions for either faculty, students, or chairs of how do I get from here to there? What form do I need? Who do I need to talk? Everything comes to a grinding halt, and that's what we don't want. So that's what I see administrators' role being in a nutshell.
Thank you. It's certainly a lot to balance between that day-to-day administrator work, but then also being able to look up and out, right? And have those conversations with the chairs.
Yeah, that's the hardest part. You can get bogged down.
Yeah. So related to this, Christina, tell us about your journey. How did you get here with all of the skills needed and flexing between administrative work and strategic work? What led you to this place?
Okay, it's a very circular route. And I used to think that it was kind of unique, but when you talk to a lot of people, especially if they're in like the last third of their career, you find out that everybody's path is circular. Very few
Mhm.
people have I was here and I went to here. I mean, we meander. I actually started out I have a communications undergrad. I started out in radio and TV. Um, Learned that that just really wasn't the place for me for a variety of reasons and went back. And at the time, I still enjoyed the communications part of the work. I thought public relations, but what businesses wanted really was a business background, even for public relations. So I went back and got my MBA. And at the time I graduated, then I got my first job. I just got into a job within higher ed with
Mhm.
what's the small business development centers. And my role was corporate training and entrepreneurial training for a college of business. And I spent a lot of years doing that. It kind of bridged business and academia. Um, and I was promoted and got my own small business development center and did that for a variety of years. And like most people, really wanted to grow. I've been doing
Yeah.
that for 15, 16 years, wanted a new challenge, and decided to move into real formal higher education instead of what was considered more continuing ed business training.
Mhm.
I went back, got my PhD in urban education, and at the same time moved into online education with the University of Wisconsin Green Bay. Worked on building infrastructure for online programs, getting them set up, getting them um, approved and delivered, really looking at enrollment and working with adult learners, basically providing them access to
Mhm.
higher ed. And that just kind of spiraled, then you find new jobs, you um, I just did more things. I helped Drake University launch their online programs, did that for a while, and then really, again, had spent about, I don't know, 10, 12 years in online, wanted to do more, wanted to look at new things. And then the role with the Chicago School came up, and I really liked the blend. It had the online, it had much stronger academic roots than what I'd been
Yeah.
doing. And it was a different kind of job, and I thought the challenge was something that I would enjoy. The one thing I will say with all that circular movement, and if you would look at the jobs on paper, you'd be like, how'd you jump from one? What I found is that there are some core skills that all jobs need. You know, Finance and budget is a skill
Mhm.
that it doesn't matter what your job. My MBA has served me well in higher ed. Having that business understanding, but also the communications, from way back
Yeah.
when, the communication is a skill that it doesn't matter what the job is. And in roles like this, where it's a leadership role and it's an administrative role, having those core skill sets, I think, lays that foundation. So I was able to, bump around to different things.
Mhm. I agree, though. It's those transferable skills, right? There's not a course or a program that's going to teach you how to be strategic and how to work with different groups of people. You really have to get in there, experience it, grow from it, and have the right mentorship and leadership
Mm.
guiding you along the way. Christine, when you talk about transferable skills, I think about our graduate students in our college. Knowing that you work with such a diverse group of students and programs, what would you say are those core transferable skills that we should be preparing our graduate students for as they graduate from our programs?
That's a great question. And I think it's one that we ask ourselves a lot, but in different ways. This is the
Yeah.
question that we look at when we're like, okay, where is higher education going to be? Especially
Hmm.
graduate programs 5 years from now, 3 years from now. Um, for our graduate students, one of the things that I think is critical, well, now I said critical, but is key is critical
Mhm.
thinking. I
Mm,
think our programs are designed to really have our students understand the locus of critical thinking, to understand
yeah.
how decisions are made, to understand that oftentimes there's not just one right decision. There's not, this is the path, but there's usually a lot of good choices, and it's choosing the best for that time, being able to analyze and look through those things to say, what is it that I need now? To me, that's a skill that can be used,
Yeah.
everybody can use that. I think another piece of it, though, is also teaching our students how these skills transfer.
Mm-hmm.
Oftentimes, when students have these skills, they see it in one box, right? This was what I was trained to do in this role, but we also have to help them understand how these skills do transfer. Our students, if you look at our programs and our programmatic learning outcomes, there's always a communications, there's always an ethics, there's always, the psychological or healthcare piece that's just core to all of our programs. And it's I think very useful for them then to see, okay, I have these set of skills, but how do I apply them in a variety of, different, whether it's occupations or
Yeah.
experiences or whatever the case is. That's I think a distinction that we see, because a lot of our programs, our students, it's not just in my portfolio, especially, there's
Yeah.
not, you do this and you're going to get this job, right? It's you do this
Right.
and you have several occupational choices that you can choose from. And so knowing how they can present those skills is, I think, a
Such a
strong
great point.
consideration. Yeah.
Yeah, and ensuring that they understand how these skills apply to so many different sectors in their job market. I also think too about professional development as a graduate student, right? Being able to take in feedback, being able to be self-reflective and professional, um, I think is such a critical skill set that you also learn in graduate education too. That's so transferable to any market that you're entering, right? Especially for
Right.
growth and leadership opportunities.
Absolutely. I think we see a lot of that too in our PhD programs and with
Mm.
our doctoral
Mm-hmm.
candidates. There's sometimes, I think, if you see in these students, it's like almost, it's that light bulb that goes off, that all of a sudden they're like, this is why we're working on the dissertation. This is why we defend proposals and defend dissertations. It's not, well, of course, we want to ensure that you've met the learning outcomes, but it's also shows us how you've been able to apply your learning, how you've been able to adapt, what you're doing, and that you have that instance of being able to say, okay, I can not only write about this, I can
Yep.
communicate it to other people, I can synthesize this information. Um, but it takes a while for graduate students to see all of that come together and why we're doing it. Sometimes it can feel like,
Mm-hmm.
why are you making me do this?
Yep.
But once they get it, they see it, and it's fascinating. And of course, you and I have both been through that process too, so we've
Mm-hmm.
lived it.
Mm-hmm.
But it's that moment of, oh yeah, okay, I see why I'm doing this. And it's fantastic when they get to that point.
It is. Well, and leading into that, Christine, I was thinking about I was preparing for our conversation, you know, higher education is facing such unsettling, unprecedented times, right? And you and I have lots of conversation about that. But I was thinking that what for you, Christina, still drives your passion for this work? What still excites you in the face of, all of the commotion and the work and the hard work that we're facing right
Yeah.
now?
And it can be hard. I mean, it is as dynamic as I've ever seen it. And Where before we could build something and 5 years from now, we'd be pretty confident that we were going down the right path or had enough time to pivot if we needed to. And that doesn't exist. I will tell you that that's actually part of the thing that does excite me. What I've enjoyed throughout my career is always been building something that I think will be sustainable. And again, everything doesn't last forever, right? But building something that you know is going to have a successful lifespan. The challenge now is because things are changing, the marketplace is changing so dramatically. Graduate students used to be very predictable. I mean, they were. We had everything. They no longer are at all. We don't know where higher education is really going to land, in this climate. So the challenge of building something that's going to be sustainable for, you know, all of these programs, again, we want them to live, and
Yeah.
it's getting harder and harder to build that infrastructure to see what that's going to be. And so having to build an infrastructure that allows for much greater flexibility, I think is the challenge that actually it's very exciting to me. It's very hard. It's not, it's very frustrating. But if you can be successful in that, I think then you've really achieved something. And so that's fun for me.
Yeah. What, knowing all of that in your world, how do you evaluate what moves forward? How do you evaluate what you're going to build? And best case scenario, right? We're still there 5 years later and we still have this sustainable product. What do you go through in your leadership style to get you to that point?
That is an excellent question. And I'm trying to think of the process. There's a piece of it that you constantly have to be looking for the opportunity, which means you have to be involved in the industry, right? That means you've got to do the reading, you've got to participate in organizations,
Yep.
you got to have your hands in the mix, right? You've got to be able to to live it, right? It's like if you're doing data, a lot of times I don't give my data to someone else to fill out the Excel spreadsheet because if I'm doing it myself, I'm in the data. I get to know it.
Right.
You got to do the same thing when you're making those kinds of decisions. You have to have that base. And then it's really trying to follow where the marketplace is. Um, and then building, looking at market data trends, looking at how, for us, graduate students are coming back to school, what they're looking for, building the program so that it meets those students where they are. So things like online is going to continue to grow. On ground is going to be much, much harder because, again, what shifted, graduate students no longer do graduate school full-time on ground as their job, right?
Yep.
There's not enough money. They're oftentimes going back to work while they're still working with kids and all the rest of it. So you have to build a program that is going to allow them that kind of flexibility. And so you just continue to build piece by piece. And then it's almost like a hypothesis, right? You've got to prove that you're making all of the right decisions with what you know. There's always you try and mitigate the risk as much as possible, but there's always going to be a little bit, right?
Yep.
And now with everything changing so much, there's a little bit more, but you try and solidify as much of that information as you can, what you know now, and building in what I call trip wires so that if something happens, you know which way you need to go, right? So you're not waiting 5 years to evaluate. So if a tripwire for me might be, are we going to get 12 new students or are we only going to get 6 new students? Because if we get 12, we can go this way. If we only get 6, we got to evaluate some things, right? Because something isn't going the way we want. We need to make those decisions now and not wait 2 years down the
Right.
road when it's too late to do anything.
And I think it gets to that piece, right? And being able to pivot when you need to and be able to pivot quickly, right? And I think that's
Mhm.
something we do really well in our college and at the Chicago school in developing those plans, but also knowing when we need to pivot.
Yep.
I appreciate that concept of the tripwires, right? And knowing what those benchmarks are going to be when it's like, nope, need to go in this direction, and we have
Yeah.
that settled. Yeah.
Yeah. I need to find a more positive word for tripwire, but I don't have one.
We'll think of one. I think related to that, Christina, one of the questions I had for you that fits really well with this is navigating the tension. If you think there is one, I think there's one between the mission and the vision, right, of what you're doing, and then that financial sustainability in graduate and professional education. So how do you balance those two factors
I
in your
wish I had
role?
a great answer for you, but that you're right. That's always the tension.
Yeah.
I've not only have I been in private or public, all of my work has been for private or public institutions, so mission based. I've also been fortunate enough to work with a lot of great nonprofit organizations, either sitting on boards or being on committees, and they have that same tension, right? You've got to be able to keep the doors open to serve your, you know, to to fulfill your mission. Is it's not even
Right.
serve people, right? If you want to fulfill your mission, you've got to be able to keep the doors open. If you can't do that, you know, it's not going to work. And there's no easy way. What I have found in my experience is there are people who are very solely mission based, right? They just
Mm-hmm.
want to do what the mission, and I love those people. And then there are people that understand the mission but are very business focused. I am much more on the business focused side, right? I love working for a mission based organization. That's fulfilling for me personally.
Mm-hmm.
But I see my job as keeping the doors open, which means that often, well, yeah, often, I'm going to say oftentimes you have to make really hard decisions,
Mm-hmm.
right? And it is things like, did we meet budget this year? And if we didn't, what are we going to do? And because the goal of the business people is to keep the doors open, right? We want to keep the doors open so we can continue to do the mission. I want everybody who loves the mission to be able to continue working for the mission.
Mm-hmm.
But at the end of the day, these are the things that um, are going to keep the organization strong. And
Right.
so we make hard decisions. There's just no way around it. There's absolutely no way around it. And again, it's one of those things where there's not usually just one choice that you can make. It'd be so much easier if there was, right? But
Mm-hmm.
there's usually several choices. And then you have to bring people together because you need to make sure you're choosing the best decision for where you are right now. And when there's a bunch of choices, there's usually people who are like, well, why aren't we doing it this, or this? And so you have to build that consensus or at least that understanding of why you're moving forward. And often when you're in a leadership position, I have learned that all levels of leadership, you only see a portion of the picture, and until you get to the top where you see the whole thing. So you also have to build some
Yeah.
trust with those people who are seeing the whole picture. And that can be hard to do, but I'm like, I am not seeing what the provost is seeing. I'm not seeing what you're seeing. I'm not seeing what the president is seeing, and I'm not seeing what system is seeing. And so you sometimes do want to push back, but I think it is helpful to recognize, where your limitations are with
Mm-hmm.
the decision making. But I think also from a leadership challenge, it's my job then to make sure that I'm communicating the
Right.
importance of what we're doing and trying to build that understanding and that support for the decision that's going forward. And again, in nonprofit and mission-based organizations, that is so tough. It is so tough.
I agree. Thank you for asking my challenging question. I really appreciate your points in bringing people together. And even when we don't have consensus, having the understanding, right? And the communication around it and understanding the layers that are impacted.
Yeah.
So thank you for
You're
that.
welcome. You're welcome.
Well, Christina, I just have a couple questions left for you that are
Sure.
more future facing. So, when you think about the future of graduate and professional education, what gives you the most optimism as we're looking forward?
That's a great. I will tell you right now,
Yes,
it's hard to find that
it
optimism. I mean,
is.
I'll just be
Which is why
very
I've asked you.
honest.
We need that
Yeah.
optimism, right?
Yeah. And I'm not an optimistic person by nature.
I know.
So I will tell you that one of the things that I think does give me optimism is two things. I will say one, I think human nature is always looking for growth, for more, to learn, and while we may have to adapt how, again, we serve students, I think that'll be a key piece of it.
Hmm.
That's never going to go away. The human beings always want to move farther down for the most part. So that gives me, I don't think education's going anywhere, right? That gives me
Right,
optimism.
right.
Um, I also think there's always something new. Right now it's artificial intelligence and it's always, it was MOOCs. There's always something new. And for
Hmm.
me, I don't like to put too much about, okay, now AI is going to take over everything. Rather, I think it's how do we incorporate that into what we do? It's not going to go away, right? We have to now learn how we embed that in education. One of the things that I think is really exciting is the MFT program is looking how AI works with healthcare, right? Because
Right,
people are going out now, instead of Googling their systems, they're going out to AI to say, okay, these are my symptoms. And then they're
right,
believing AI.
right,
So now we have to train our new healthcare practitioners and our new therapists and all the rest to say, how do you work with your patients to ensure that they're being safe with that? So there's always these new things that we have to incorporate, which again gives me optimism because somebody's got to do it, and we're the ones, right? We're the ones who are going to
right.
take that on.
Yeah.
So yeah,
And that's what you love, right? Building those
that's what I
foundations,
love.
building
Yep.
something new. Thank
So
you,
it's all
Christina.
good. You bet.
That's great. So my last question for you. As we step away from our titles and our roles behind the dean's desk, what's one thing you hope people better understand about the work that you do and why it matters beyond the institution? Thinking of your legacy.
My legacy. One of the things that I liked about this conversation, a question I really have not really been asked or reflected all that much on, was that conversation of how we move a mission-based organization forward. And so if I can help people understand the business behind it, right? If they can understand the choices that people have to make and the challenges that are faced to ensure, um, I'd be okay with that.
Yeah.
If I can clarify the importance of infrastructure to nonprofit organizations, I'd be okay with that legacy.
I like it. Thanks,
Yeah,
Christina. Thank you so much
absolutely.
for the conversation. I always enjoy connecting with you and talking about our higher education roles and the landscape that we're facing. So thank you for
You're
joining me
welcome.
behind the dean's desk and more to come.
Yeah, this was fun. Thank you so much.
You're welcome.